Today we have with us my friend Daniel Borysewicz, who has been a friend of mine for over 20 years. He's a chaplain in hospice and also ordained minister at MCC and does the San Francisco night ministry work. And most importantly, he created a workshop called Leaving Shame Behind. And we're going to talk about shame and masculinity, the patriarchy, and healing, and all of those lovely things that we want to keep secret.
Question 1. How can spirituality help us to come out in the various ways that we do?
Well, I think for me, speaking as a Buddhist, and I think we could probably say the same is true for most spiritual traditions, that it invites us into some kind of relationship with ourselves, right? And so, in Buddhism, we practice and work towards coming into relationship with ourselves, either through meditation or other rituals. And so, in that relationship, finding out who we are authentically and being able to feel empowered in that who we are as individuals, and recognizing that it's our individuality that connects us to whatever it is that we want to think of as the ultimate or the outside the mundane everyday world, right? We can only connect to that stuff through our own lived experience, through our own bodies, through our own experience. And so the more intimate we can get with that and the more we can take up our place in that, the closer we can get to an authentic expression of whatever it is, even whether it's sexuality or kink or desire or how we want to be in the world. It all matters. And I'm going to silence my phone now.
Perfect.
Question 2. Why did you decide to create this podcast?
I think that for me, I'm really interested in being a part of a community that's really focused on healing and focused on authentic expressions of ourselves. And that's brought me into connection with people from such a variety of spiritual traditions and a variety of lived experiences, some that are vastly different than mine, others that are really similar to mine. But I think everybody has this way of sharing what it's like to be them and how it is that they got there. And I think that can then teach us how to be ourselves more and heal the pieces that feel incomplete or invisible or difficult or just to sort of make it through the day. So for me, it's really I want to be in conversation more, and these are all people that I'm in conversation with anyway. But to have the conversation recorded about how it is that we are in the world, and the recognition that spirituality is kind of useless if it doesn't make my life better, if it doesn't affect my worldview and doesn't affect how I am in the world, or make me a better person, So that's the idea behind the podcast, and that's why you're going to see so many different expressions of humanity. And hopefully in that we'll see ourselves a little bit more clearly. I know already we're on episode 5, and I already see myself more clearly. Like, it's helped me. And because there's something that happens too in the filming of this that changes, these are conversations I have all the time because those are the people I hang out with. But in the filming of it, it makes it more real, more, it exists in a more tangible kind of way. And so at the end of almost all of these, I've just felt so amazed at what we talk about. So that's why I do this, and that's what I hope you find here. And if you don't, let us know. we're really, I think the other piece is I want to have a conversation not just with the people I'm here with, but also with the people in the audience. And what are the things you like? What are the things you don't like? What do you agree with? What don't you agree with? Can we find ways to develop conversations together? And what would that look like if we're doing this in this virtual kind of way? Today our guest is the Reverend Daniel Borysewicz, and he's a progressive, sex-positive hospice chaplain seeking radical inclusion for all people, regardless of race, nationality, sexual or gender identity, or socioeconomic class. Daniel works to provide solutions for problems that individuals have difficulty dealing with. Shame and internalized homophobia are two examples, and assists in connecting people with others for mutual benefit. And the reason Daniel's here is he's the creator and facilitator of Flourishing Beyond Shame, which focuses primarily on shame surrounding sexuality and gender identity. And he facilitates classes on desire and intimacy. Social justice is also an important part of his work. And you can find out more about Daniel's work at the website leaveshamebehind.com, which we'll have a link to. And Daniel is a graduate of the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California, with an MDiv. And he's also a good friend of mine who I've known for
over 20 years.
Yeah, a long time. We were both much younger and prettier. And specifically, I wanted to talk about your work with shame, and I know that you and I have had numerous conversations about this. And so I want to start with, what led you to this as a practice? What led you to figuring out this is shame and I need to work on it in my life. And then of course that work leads you into doing it for other people, but how did it start for you?
For me, being a large person most of my life, I've struggled with body image. And for me there was a lot of shame around that, bullying and name calling when I was young and also getting older, not to mention even just the being queer and being a sissy boy, right. Which was part of it as well. But there was the body image issues that for me was really kept me from becoming the authentic person that I wanted to be, or that I thought I was supposed to be, because I hadn't even growing up I had no idea what that was supposed to be for me. And one of the things that over the course of my years of getting older, being an adult, getting into my 30s, and then moving into a place where I actually started to recognize where there were issues in my life, as far as with alcohol and drugs, which I stopped doing in my early 30s. And that actually allowed me to be a little bit more aware of some of the issues that were intrinsic to who I was, and being a full-figured guy was something that I struggled with. And starting to recognize that the things that people told me were not actually true.
Right.
About being, I'm a slob, I'm lazy, I'm,
out of shape.
All these different things, these shaming mechanisms that we use.
Right.
I also recognized that I was actually using those on other people.
Right.
To feel better about myself.
Right.
And that was one of the things that I realized that I needed to become more, to start letting go of those things. And and also part of this journey that I had is that in my sexuality, as far as, there was when I was high school, I was identified as bisexual. That back in the 70s, bisexual was kind of in and it was acceptable.
Right.
And then coming out as being gay in the early 30s, and then I kind of went back in the closet as being bisexual again, and then when I got sober, I became a militant homosexual. In your face, I'm a fag, I'm in your face, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And over the course of and I realized that was a little bit too extreme too. So so for me, I started recognizing, okay, let's kind of move back into this and recognizing where am I in the spectrum of sexual identity and awareness. Because one of the things that I felt as I moved through the world as a gay man, I had attractions to other people other than other men.
Right.
And I had internalized shame around that. It's like, oh no, I can't have these feelings because that's not who I am. But actually, that's who I am.
Well, and I think that that's a really common problem in white male cis spaces.
Yeah.
That there's such there's such a level of misogyny and gynophobia, right? Like this fear of seeing or being near a vagina that kind of puts people, and I think also part of like the coming out process, and being like, makes us sort of, because I'm gay and that's a specific thing, then the other things like bisexual is just a journey. Like that was my journey to gay. Like I became bisexual because it was safer than being queer.
Yes.
Right? And so like the ways in which gay white men sort of ostracize bi people or people who are interested in other people who may have vaginas, or, I've been in play parties where, gay men get upset if like there's a woman playing beside them, or if there's a trans guy in the room, and the way that all of that plays out. And it's really interesting to me because I feel like it's such a commitment to not just shame but also patriarchy. Like we get just steeped in this way of like, and it's such a I think it's such a hindrance, right? Like you were saying, it stops us from becoming our authentic self.
Yeah. And for me, one of the things that you mentioned about being bisexual, there was a time when I was that militant homosexual or a gay man where I was also part of that conversation and that narrative of the fact that, the bisexuals just haven't made up their mind yet. And that's just another form of shaming, as far as shaming them to saying, you just need to get off the fence.
Right.
And I remember myself even saying those things, you just need to get off the fence, you can't decide.
Right.
But it's actually not true. It's like, this is, whatever he's attracted to or she's attracted to or they are attracted to is none of my business.
Right.
Unless they're attracted to me, then it is my business.
Right.
And that was a really difficult thing for myself to really, to move through, to recognize that it's like, it's none of my frickin' business who they're attracted to unless they're focusing on me.
Right. Well, and I think it's also really interesting because I think that part of that militancy, because I went through it too, and part of it was the AIDS crisis, and I was super militant around the AIDS crisis, and that's where I picked up being a faggot, and particularly being an infected faggot, which is my favorite identifier these days. But I think that part of that militancy also comes from the shame that you carry, that internalized homophobia, that just says, no, I have to protect this at all costs. Like it's like the pendulum swings the other way, and all of a sudden we go from hating ourselves to this kind of false bravado that sort of says, this is what it means to be a queer guy or a gay man, and if you're not this, then, don't tread on that, right? Like, so anything that sort of may make it more complex than just this simple cut and dried, I like to suck dick and fuck ass, then, like anything that makes that more complicated becomes forbidden, right? And that just sort of adds to our shame, I think, because for me, coming to a place where I understood that, no, I'm just a gay guy, I'm also a cis guy, and that, but that's, that had to come through this place of nuance. It had to come from a place of like knowing myself and dealing with my own internalized shame and guilt and all of those things, and the stories that people tell you around body stuff and around.
Oh God, yeah.
And
that's one of the things that's really, when I was living in Tucson, and I got my first real interactions with trans men, some gay trans men and just some trans men. I realized, this is something I'm really attracted to.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so I started, and as I started exploring that possibility and dating people, I started getting pushback from my gay cis male friends,
right.
A few, where it's all about what's in their pants,
right.
And that goes back to the whole notion of gender is specific to what is between your legs,
right?
And it's like, this one friend of mine, I said I was dating this person. It's like, well, does it mean you're bisexual? I'm like, no.
Right.
So, well, weren't they born female? Yeah, but they identify as male. It's
Right.
like, well, what are they, what's in there, do they have a penis? Or does he have a cock? I forget what he said. I was like, well, I said, yeah. He's like, well, how big is it? Like, well, that's none of your business unless you want to have sex with him.
Right.
And, it comes down to, it's like, what is in someone's pants
Right.
defines on who they are and their gender presentation. It's like,
Right.
no, it doesn't.
Well, and I think
Because it's what you say you are is what you are. And
Right.
it's my job to respect your wishes.
Right.
As a human being, not necessarily, and especially as a white, cis, gay man.
Right.
To recognize who you are because that's who you say you are.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think it's really interesting because I think that, for so long, being gay or queer was so tied up to sexual performance and sexual activity.
Absolutely.
And
Especially,
even today,
he's a stud because he's got a big cock and he
Right.
fucks all the boys.
but even like from the outside, right? Like the shame that we get
Yeah.
instigated to, it's like the biggest problem that I think straight homophobes have is the fact that we're sexual, right? And so that then when we first sort of come out, and part of that sort of protective layer becomes, it's all about my sex life, and it's not about how I form relationships or how I interact with people or how I am in the world, right? Like who I am, and being a sissy, being able to sort of explore, like, okay, being a sissy, does that mean I have trans leanings, or do I want to be and then I started being a sister and wearing dresses and all of that, and I think it's really interesting, the journey that we go through to sort of come to a place where we realize, like, yeah, queer is my identity regardless of what sex practices I have or don't have. Like, I can be queer and asexual, right? Or I can be queer and celibate. I can be queer and, bisexual. Like I think that taking it out of the place of the sexual behavior into, like, yeah, and part of my difficulty when I started, after my partner died and I started dating, was that so many men were just tied up in their dicks and my dick, and so much of the interaction centered around my biology, which had nothing to do with who I was as a person. Like, I just became a thing known, like I was a dick attached to this body, but
You were a sexual object.
Right.
And that's all it was. And that's, and there are moments in our lives,
Right.
and depending on which is totally appropriate.
Right.
I remember when I was young.
can be really hot.
I remember when I was much younger, as far as having sex in the bushes in Balboa Park in San Diego, or in the restroom at Macy's at a
Right.
mall somewhere, was getting my dick sucked through a glory hole.
Right.
It's like, those were wonderful times, and that's all it was about. It wasn't about connecting
Right.
on a relationship level. It was
Right.
about sex.
Right.
And those things are okay, and being able to share those things openly today
Right.
is something about letting go of the shame around those
Right.
things, because those practices, are shameful, because they're not shameful. They are needs that we needed to have fulfilled, and at the time we were able to do that. It was consensual.
Right.
Even though it was in a
And it's also
seedy,
fun.
it was in a
Yeah.
seedy place, seedy, dirty place, and I use that term loosely because other people would call it that, although the floor of the bathroom usually was dirty.
Yeah.
Or in bookstores back in the day when those
Yeah.
things, well, I know they're still around too, but back in the day doing those things, and it's like that also added to the excitement
Right.
of it as well.
Right.
Because it was that forbidden thing, that thing, oh, what if we get caught?
But I also think that it's momentary, right? Like, so
Absolutely.
it's not a definition. Like I
And it is transactional too.
right. Totally.
You suck me, I suck you, or
Right.
whatever, and that's it. We're done.
Right. And it's transactional, but it is hot. Like
Yeah.
I went through times when that was the best thing. Like, oh my God. And there was no shame attached to it. It was just, that was what I was doing. And I think that what happens though is when we try to make that the only expression of our lives that we have. I think when I was, part of it is that became like it was the only way I could relate as a queer guy, like, you know, and then I thought, oh, that's what it means to be queer.
Yeah.
So, and if you're not engaging in that way, then you're kind of a different, you know, you're not down enough, you're not queer enough, you're not, you know, like the very, oh, you're just a sweater queen, you know.
Yes, I remember that.
You know, all of those comments that would come up, and it was like, or, you know, oh, you're not kinky enough, right? Or you're not, you know, like, coming out as monogamous a few years ago, and like the pushback that I got, because people just sort of assumed that meant that I was down on people who were poly or non-monogamous. And it was like, well, no, that has nothing to do with it.
And then there's also the other thing around, especially since marriage has become legal.
Right.
Is that if you're not monogamous,
Right.
then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why are you not? It's like,
Right.
you know, are you guys going to get married? It's like, no, we have no plans of getting married. It's
Right.
like, you know, we're in an open relationship. You know, I'm, you know, that's part, but that's also part of the shaming thing.
Right.
One of the things that, going back to the anonymous sex and the transactional stuff, is that for me that was also part of getting the validation.
Right.
And that was to help because of the body image issues and the internalized shame and homophobia and stuff that I had, that I was able, you know, by getting those in situations. Oh, he likes me. You know, kind of going back to was it what's her face, Sally Fields? Right. Oh, you really like me. It's like, you know, getting those validations. If someone looks at me and smiles at me, oh, they like me. They want to have sex with me. You know, and it's like, it's all stuff in my head, because I crave, and not just I, but we crave intimacy.
Right.
We crave people's attention and their validation.
Right.
Because that's part of who we are as social creatures.
Right.
And if we didn't get it growing up, or even if we did get it growing up in certain ways, we still crave it for more things, because we're not. The important thing is, I've learned, is that the validation has to come from me first.
Right.
Because I can't expect, I mean, I can hope and want for other people, but having those expectations that it's only external validation is not a healthy way to be.
Well, and also that not only that it's only external, but also that it's external and it looks a particular kind of way.
Yes.
Right? Like, if you want to do X with me, you know, or you look like X and you approve of me, then I'm okay.
Yes, absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
And
Oh,
so,
he's got a really hot boyfriend. It's like, oh, well, how did he get a really hot boyfriend? It's like, because, you know, he must have a big dick.
Right.
Which is, I remember
Or lots of
hearing that.
money.
Or lots of money. Yeah, those two things. It's like, what if he has neither of those things?
Right. What if he's just a nice guy?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, God, no, that can't be it.
Right. Exactly. And the way that, and that's what makes shame so insidious, I think. And that's what, you know, when I teach around desire and stuff, and I try to get people to sort of see how desire is embodied in them, in their body and in their experience. What does it feel like?
Yeah.
And what is it tied to? Like, recognizing, like, sometimes my desire stemmed from loneliness, feeling isolated, needing attention, needing some kind of gratification, some kind of I don't want to say it's unhealthy, but it wasn't going to actually, my needs weren't going to be met if I went on the hunt. You know, if I'm looking to fix loneliness, the bathhouse isn't going to help me, right?
It'll help you for the moment,
Right.
but it's not gonna fix the problem.
Right.
I mean, it's situational.
Right. And the other thing is I think we also feel like, oh, we are not allowed to be lonely. Like, we're not allowed, like, that's a problem and we have to fix it. Instead of being like, this is actually just part of human experience, right? All of these things are just part of what it means to be a person. And it's okay. And I don't have to fix it. I don't have to go out and hunt for it. You know, and sometimes, yeah, I call up friends and I go, hey, I need to know you love me. Can you just say it? Right? Or, you know, there is a way in which you can go out and just try to work with that stuff. But to recognize, like, oh, wait, I'm not actually horny. I'm just lonely. Or I just need to be touched.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe if I just need to be touched, maybe there's a better, more...
Maybe a friend could come over and you guys
Right.
could sit on the couch and cuddle.
Right.
I had someone who was, I heard you're a really good cuddler. It's like, can I come over and we cuddle for a while? It's not sexual or anything like that. This is somebody I've known since my time at Pacific School of Religion. I've known him through graduate studies. and came over, and we laid on the bed and we cuddled for a while, and it was really nice. And it's like,
Right.
and it was not sexual, and it was that's one of the things that men really crave, that intimacy.
Right.
Because we're human beings. I mean,
Right.
that's the point. I watched this wonderful documentary yesterday afternoon. Eric and I watched it, my partner, and it was The Mask You Live In.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
And
It's really
it was
wonderful.
wonderfully done. But it talks about those models that boys grow up in, as far as
Right.
be a man, don't show emotions.
Right.
And that's one of the things that, regardless, even for us queer boys,
Right.
we grow up through that life, as far as being told, be a man, buck up and just deal with it.
Right.
And
Well, just look at the way we bottom shame, right? Like if you're the bottom, or if you enjoy bottoming, then you're less masculine. Or there's the amount of bottom shaming and the amount of and that's what I loved about the relationship on Pose between Billy Porter's character and what was his name? Dylan's character.
I've not seen Pose, so
it's a wonderful.
I know the show. I know the show, but I've never seen it. So.
Well, and at the start of their relationship, that was one of these areas of contention, was about bottoming, and Billy Porter just kind of. He had this monologue that was so beautiful, just about no, that's not okay, and that's just another form of homophobia. That's just another form of the patriarchy. That's just another form of oppression. Like if you like to get fucked, and it's okay, and it doesn't. And if you don't like to get fucked, that's okay too, right?
Yeah.
Like you get to decide for yourself what feels good to your body, and I think that that's so intrinsic in part of sort of dealing with shame and dealing with our internalized oppressions and our hidden biases, right? Is to look at like, oh, what is it that I really do like?
Yeah. Our desires are so tied to our shame around them.
Right.
One of the things I taught a class for the kink community last spring in San Francisco on embracing your desires. Mm-hmm. And the first part of the class was talk and slides and some conversation with the participants in the class, and a lot of it was about shame.
Right.
And then the second part of the class was where I would show things up on the screen about, do you desire this? And there was a scale on the wall where they would actually go either +3 or -3, and they would self-select. And it was actually really fun exercise because there was things from being dominated or being dominant, dominant or being dominated, and there was all kinds of sexual things. There was a lot of kinky stuff. So it was a variety of different things, and it was really interesting and fun to watch these people, because some people were like, they were so much into it, they would actually go way past the +3, or go, if they're like, oh, I'm totally not gonna go way past the -3. But it was a safe space, and they were able to really embrace those things. There were a few people that were kind of like they weren't able to really decide, or they were in the middle most of the time, which is okay. And the important thing, though, is to recognize what your desires are.
Right. Yeah.
And be okay with that. And one of the things during the question and answer at the end, one of the persons brought up was like, well, what about the taboo things? The taboo sex stuff, the taboo kinky stuff that we don't want to talk about, And it's like, those are important things to talk about in a safe space.
Right.
And it's like one of the things, when I do that class again later this year, I'm going to actually put in some of the taboo stuff that I didn't include before.
Right.
Because I was like, well, I mentioned some things like cutting or knife play, not really cutting, but knife play, and, and looking at something, maybe looking at a little bit more, go a little deeper for people.
Right.
And I'm actually, next month, the 23rd or 24th, whatever, the last Monday of February, I'm teaching my class on shame.
Right.
But this time, I'm actually not doing it on sexuality and gender. I'm actually doing it for the kink community, and I'm actually looking at shame around being a dominant or being a submissive. So top or bottoming. You talked about bottoming, shame about bottoming. It's like, how do we move through the world as authentic beings?
Right.
And that is the thing that I really am focusing on in this year. As far as one of the things, my plans was this last year was a time of kind of recuperating and nesting with Eric, and since I stepped away from my more extensive work with the playing industry, and to now that I'm coming into this new year, as far as wanting to get back into this work, the educational part and the activism part of shame.
So we were talking about the experience of being a clergy person and being visible and talking about things like kink or sexuality in terms of religious experience or in the context of a religion or spiritual life, and not having it be like, oh, you know, it only looks like this thing, right? Like of two totally in love people who you connect intimately, and that's the spiritual expression of sexuality is this thing.
For some people, it is,
and that's great.
Yeah.
And that, but it can also include like the desires for sex that is hot and exciting and meets my desires is just as spiritual, no matter what the behaviors look like. Or no matter what I like to say when I teach that there's nothing that you can think of that's consensual, that's outside of the teachings, that's outside of, as long as there's consent, it's all good. And so whatever your personal expression is, the actual practice of being a spiritual person or being a Buddhist is to be in your body and have an authentic experience. So it doesn't matter, like, if you're authentically having anonymous sex, great. If you're both in the room and it's great, everybody's consenting, wonderful. If you're, practicing Tantra and, in these ways of 3 days of intimate connection without orgasm and doing all the other ways that sometimes people think sex has to be, but I think it's really interesting to sort of talk about kink and desire in religious contexts.
I mean, for me, that's one of the things that I think kind of goes back to when I was talking earlier about being in-your-face homosexual. I think for me, that's also part of that was maybe my training ground for becoming more authentic in my life about being a hospice chaplain, being a minister, a clergy person, and being able to move through the world and be shameless, or shame-free about some of the things that are in my life, because it was like, oh no, I can't talk about those things with these people. No, there are contexts where it depends on context, because there are certain situations where I don't need to talk about my kinky self when I'm talking with a patient who's dying from cancer. However, there's times I wear long sleeves at work, so to cover my tattoos. There was one time for a connection with a gentleman who was in his 80s. He had actually, I think he was in his 90s. In his 80s, he was on the cover of some motorcycle magazine. He's got sleeve tattoos. For me to connect with him, I actually rolled up my sleeves and I showed him that I had tattoos because of the context. So I was able to open myself up for that. Even for this, tattoos, for a minister, for a hospice chaplain, is pretty touchy for some people. Other people think it's wonderful. I don't wear these types of earrings on my day job. I do wear small plugs, but I do put myself out there as being who I am, trying to be authentic. And if there's people that question it, and if they say, I don't want you to come back, it's like, okay, that is your choice, and I don't take it personally. And I tell people, it's like, if you don't want me to come back to visit you again, that's okay. I don't take it personally.
Well, and sometimes you're in that interaction with it, and I think specifically around chaplaincy, like you're in an interaction and you just realize it's not working. Like whatever is going on, it's not working. And I often take those moments and sort of just go, hey, I don't know, I'm getting a sense that this may not be working for you. Can we talk about, do you want to see someone else, or do you I don't have to be here, like it's okay, and it's okay for if it's not working for you, like we can one, do something else, we can have a conversation, or I can leave and find another chaplain, because I I'm not everybody's flavor.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad chaplain, and it doesn't mean I'm a bad clergy person, and it doesn't mean anything about me. It just means I don't have to be everybody's flavor.
No. I remember when I had my surgery back in 2013 at the VA here in San Francisco. The morning of the surgery, a priest chaplain came in to talk with me. We had a lovely conversation, a very short conversation. I was very excited, loved talking to him.
Right.
And then when I was in the ICU after the surgery, a priest stuck his head in. I don't know if you were in the room or not when he did that, maybe not, but he stuck his head in the door and I said, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so it was a different person.
Right.
And it had nothing to do with him personally. It's
Right.
well, for one thing, I didn't want to talk to anybody at that point in time. I was just
You're
out of
super
surgery.
medicated.
I was medicated. I was still in pain, you
Right.
know, and when, and seeing you there was a very different story.
Right.
Because I know you.
Right.
But I didn't want to talk to this priest who I didn't know.
And I also knew to just sit there and shut up. Like, you were coming out of something and I didn't
And
need to-
but I mean, for me, that's one of the things I've learned though is that, when I go in, people don't want to see me. But also one of the things too is that with the work I do in hospice, is that it's different than in a hospital setting.
Right.
Whereas I'm there to provide emotional support as well.
Right.
And that's one of the things when they hear the word chaplain, they're like, oh, I'm not religious, I'm not even really spiritual. It's like, that's great. How are you feeling today?
Right. Yeah.
It's like, how are you feeling with the fact that you just got a diagnosis that you're
Right.
dying, you're supposed to die in 6 months?
Right.
I mean, I word it like that. However, but I want to provide emotional support. And a lot of times there's that baggage that other people carry
Around
with the word chaplain.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try to do is I usually don't mention the word chaplain when I call people on the phone and say I provide emotional support, and if there's a need for spiritual support, I can provide that or arrange for it.
Right.
And I get in there, once they get to see me and meet me, if they want me to support them, they can. But I go in there as my authentic self as far as this is what I can provide for you.
Right.
And if you want that, I can provide it, or I can get someone in.
Right.
You need a Catholic priest, you need a Jewish rabbi, do you need an imam,
Right.
or an imam, imam I think is pronounced,
Yeah.
and do you need someone for particular rituals,
Right.
or even a Buddhist priest?
Right.
I mean, there's been that situations as well.
Yeah, well, I get called in sometimes for people, and I think though that going back to this idea of like the context matters,
It
right?
does.
So I don't go into to see a patient thinking, oh, we're going to talk about sex.
Usually I don't talk about that with hospice patients, although,
Right.
if that's what they want to talk about, then
I've talked about intimacy with hospice patients. I've talked about the intimacy of their relationships with their partners often,
yes.
because it's such at least in my experience, it's part of the process that people come to is the ending of this relationship. And so, often we'll talk about what that intimacy has been like for them.
Yeah.
And are there ways that that's getting interrupted by what's currently happening, and can we work with that and find solutions for it?
I've had a few conversations with men
But
about
that's
especially
much-
like prostate cancer
Yeah.
and intimacy with their spouse.
Right, and that's a much different conversation
Oh, yeah.
than about sex. But it comes from the work I've done around shame and sexuality and all of that stuff, it comes from the same place, because it's always, for me anyway, it's so intimately connected to how can we be ourselves and be who we want to be in the world, and not be dragged around by ideas or biases or any of those things, including in our relationship with our partners during the process of death.
I know one of the things you get a group of gay men our age range in a room and talk about, okay, let's talk about intimacy. And they're like, oh, or it's like, yeah, we'll talk about sex.
Right,
We're
yeah.
talking about sex. No, let's talk about intimacy.
Right.
And where we are letting down our barriers, we're becoming vulnerable. And that's part of being authentic, is
Yeah.
being vulnerable to all of who I am.
Yeah.
I don't like the
Brene Brown.
I don't like the warts and all
Yeah.
stuff, but I mean, yeah, Brene Brown's. I mean, that was one of the things when I was first started doing the work on shame and creating my shame workshop. Brene Brown was just starting to get her work published
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So for me, I've actually definitely incorporated some of the stuff that she's done, but the intimacy and recognizing what we desire is so tied to
Yeah.
shame. I want to mention this is a book that I read this last year was by Justin Lee Miller, Tell Me What You Want.
Yeah.
And it was about this largest sex survey they ever did in America, and it talked about all the different desires. I've preached on that. I preached Folsom Sunday at MCC San Francisco. I preached on that and talked about the 6 categories of things, you know, and about that we desire as human beings.
Right.
And most of the people that took the survey were identified as heterosexual.
Right.
So, you know, one of the key things that I got out of that is that statistically common means normal.
Right.
And that means if your desire is statistically common with a lot of people, then it's a normal desire.
Right.
And that takes a lot of the shame. It can.
Right.
It doesn't always, but it can take the shame out of desires.
Right.
Because the fact that they have it, 4,500 people have it,
Right.
well, 200 people in a survey have this desire, it's common.
And I guess for me, I actually don't want to tie it to that. I want people, just because I want people to feel like no matter what you feel, it's okay. And it doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to be, even if it's not statistically significant to other people, even if you're the only person in the world who has that particular kink or desire, it doesn't, like, it's great. And I think that you need to connect to it, even if you never get it met. Like, because that's the other thing about desire and intimacy. Like, sometimes I have desires I have no intention of ever fulfilling. Like, I know they're great, but no, that's not going to happen.
That's just not going to happen, no.
Right. And that's okay.
Yeah, it is.
It doesn't mean that I'm not authentic or I'm not, kinky enough or whatever. It just means, that's not something I want to do. And that's okay. Like, it doesn't... And that's why I don't like to think about in terms of, like, statistically significant, just because... And sometimes it's hot to me because it's, like, I miss the days when being queer was radical.
Yeah.
When we were not the flavor of the month. And, when the Castro was the Castro because it was the only safe place in the country for us to be, right? There's a certain way in which how that was kind of great for me because I miss being I miss being radical. I miss being, it's sort of like on The Simpsons, we're here, we're queer, get used to it, and they go, yeah, we're used to it, stop marching.
Well, there's a thing right there about that.
Right, yeah.
But I think for me, when I was talking about as far as the statistical commonality of something to make it to normalize it,
right.
That is also for some people. They need to know that they're not alone.
Right.
To let go of the shame around this thing that they've been holding, this deep, dark secret
right.
that they've been holding on that they're ashamed of, that they can't live into themselves authentic selves because of that. I totally agree with what you said about even if you're the only person on the whole planet who has this desire, it's okay. It is okay.
Right.
Absolutely. The work I do around shame, though, is because people want to know that they're not alone.
Right.
And that is a part that is important to let people know that you are not alone in your desires, and that there are other people that have similar desires or the same desire as you. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to feel the shame that you do because you're not alone.
Well, and I think
some people need that.
Well, because I think that it's intimacy that generates shame. It's the intimate people in our lives that create the shame that we carry.
Oh, absolutely. It's our parents, it's teachers, peers, all those people.
All those people. And when we're coming out of shame, when we're working with it and trying to sort of cast light on it, it's often because of intimacy. Like, that we heal from that stuff, right? Like, it's because we begin to intimately connect with people and ourselves.
Yes.
So I think it's really interesting when we talk about shame, we can't talk about it without talking about intimacy. We can't talk about it without talking about how do we interact with each other as social people.
Yeah.
Because it gets instilled in intimacy and it gets healed in intimacy, and I think that's also really great.
Yeah. One of the things that I found very freeing of my secrets was sharing them with someone else.
Right.
And that took a lot of that intimate moment of sharing those secrets, those secret desires, the shit that I did in the past that I'm ashamed of or that I have regrets about, and sharing about those things allows that power within me. Like, it's no longer a secret.
Right.
I'm not carrying this to my grave stuff,
Right.
but it's so freeing because it allows me to like say, oh, I'm not just carrying this alone. Someone else knows it, and they want to still be my friend.
Right. They still love me.
They still love me. They want to be my friend. They maybe not be my friend, but they still love me.
Right.
And that is one of the things that is so freeing with that, and that's where the intimacy comes in.
Right. Exactly.
That being able to connect with another human being on that intimate level, where you're letting them know all these things about you.
Right.
And that they still see you, they still acknowledge you, and they still say I love you.
Right, and I think that's what makes things like your workshop and my workshops work, and why it is that when we create the brave space and we invite people to share what they're finding out as we have conversations with each other, that allows that light, that allows that healing, that allows that, oh, they didn't run screaming from the room, or maybe they did, but it had nothing to do with me, right? Like,
and it builds empathy in an individual, because if I'm telling a story about something that I'm a secret or something I'm ashamed of from my past, and they can identify with it, then they can actually start building some empathy with understanding about what I was going through and how I was feeling. Oh yeah, I felt just like that, or I felt similar. Whether they're saying that or not, they're recognizing it, and that actually is going to help them in their own healing, because they know that well, if this person got through it, maybe I can too. Right. I mean, that's part of it, and it's one of the things that I've found that with being out in the streets with the night ministry, a lot of people just want to tell their story. Yeah. They want someone to listen to them. Well, and I think and the same thing with our chaplaincy, as far as there to listen to a person talking about what's going on with them, and being open to that. And not enough of us do that.
Right. Well, and I tell people my job is to just hear people. I just sit down and let people tell their stories. That's what my job is in the world. Like, I just sit down and tell me your story, whatever that happens to be in this moment. But that's what my job is, and that's why we do this podcast. That's why I'm a chaplain. Like, that's why I go see patients. Like, I just think the more that we can have people tell our stories, the better off we are as people. And so I want to thank you for coming, and I want to wrap this up and remind people that you can see Daniel's work at www.leaveshamebehind.com, which we can we'll have links to. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Patreon, and so thanks very much for coming. We've been friends for so long that it's great to and we've had this conversation so many times.
We have.
And it's nice to have it on film.
And not just for posterity.
Exactly. Thank you. Goodbye.
Hey guys, it's Fred. I'm the producer, videographer, and editor for Stump the Monk, and I just wanted to let you know that as of this episode, we've made a few changes to the formula of the show and how it works. One of those is that we are now hosting the public videos on a website, as well as links to all of our show notes and social media streams and all of that, just because we realize that that is probably going to make it easier for a lot of you listening. I also wanted to say thank you so much for the support that we've been receiving from you over the past couple of months. We really appreciate your monthly donations over on Patreon. It has really made a big difference to the way that we create the show. We will be getting more high quality mics very soon, thanks to your donations and your support in general. Forward to some of the changes that we are rolling out as of this episode airing, and until next month, thank you so much for listening, and enjoy.